Hello and welcome to our April version of our GDTA Spotlight session here online on Zoom. Thanks for joining. And I'm really happy to see a lot of familiar faces here joining from the GDTA, from the Global Design Thinking Alliance, and also some new faces and names. Great that you are joining. The Global Design Thinking Alliance is a kind of loose network which we established about 5 years ago at the 10th anniversary of the School of Design Thinking and in Potsdam. And we have now currently, I think we have 32 member institutions around the planet in 5 continents and about 16 countries. And the GDTA Spotlight session is our monthly online event, a 1-hour event where we have special guests invited to talk about their specific topic for about 30 minutes, and then get into a discussion about what we heard, what we learned. And that is an open discussion. That is why we kept it not as a webinar here, but just as an open Zoom call. And you are happy to use the chat while the speaker is talking, and later to switch on also your video. We would love to see you. I love to see who is there. And usually our crowd is quite international. And it's a pleasure to see so many people from different countries joining our session. My name is Uli Weinberg, and I'm the director of the School of Design Thinking in Potsdam since 15 years. And I also have the pleasure to head up the GDTA, the Global Design Thinking Alliance, together with Richard Paris in South Africa, who is not on the call today, as far as I see here. So, but yeah, let's give it a start today. Maybe maybe a little bit back. Steffi Schwertfeger, who is always arranging everything here and taking care of all the things in the background. Thanks for that. So you probably are familiar with Zoom. In the meantime, you can choose between the speaker view and the gallery view. So as soon as our speaker is talking, probably it's best to switch to the speaker view. And please switch off your audio and also your video during the presentation. But after the presentation, I would love to see you, and we would love to see you to get into the discussion. We record this session to make it also available to our members and friends who don't have the time to join today. We have our friends in Australia who most of the time have a hard time to stay up that late at night. So I'm very happy to welcome today a very special guest, a co-founder of the Global Design Thinking Alliance 5 years ago, or nearly 6 years ago, Linda Hickman from the London School of Economics. And I'm really pleased that you are joining today and giving us some insights about what your experience was through the past years at a very well-known business school, one of the best known in the world, I would guess. And Linda Hickman, you are an entrepreneur, you are an educator, you are a mentor, you are an author, you are an economic associate, or you are an associate at the London School of Economics, and you are a founder of Hickman and Associates, a consultancy based in London. And you are, in the pre-talk, you were thinking about different topics, but you were always moving back to entrepreneurship and to startups and what design thinking does for startups. So before you start, one experience from my side, we were trying to find out through the past 15 years since we started the D-School, where is the hardest part to cooperate with. And we found out it's not the big companies, it's not the medium-sized companies. It's actually, if you look at the organizational structure, it is always the startups, because the startups are somehow in a design thinking mode already by heart, by just starting it. But I think you are addressing the people who are studying at a university and never think to be an entrepreneur, maybe firsthand. And I'm really interested what your learning is, Linda, and was through the past years, and how you managed to have design thinking as a part of the London School of Economics. So please welcome Dr. Linda Hickman, and I'm happy to see you here and to listen to you. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
I hope that, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ule. I think that the HPI in Potsdam is one of my favorite places in the world. I'll never forget seeing the building the first time. I thought this is what I've always dreamed a school should look like. So I'm glad that we have this available online too. I want to welcome everyone that has shown up today online. I'm delighted to be able to share the rewarding opportunity I'm having developing an applied course of design thinking for startups at the London School of Economics and Political Science, or we will just call it for short LSE. The story actually begins many years ago. My formative years in Palo Alto opened many decades later an alumni magazine opportunity. It described the new program at Stanford, a D-School.
Linda, if you want
yes.
to, do you want to share slides? Because we don't see slides yet.
Yes, thank you so very much. I did that far too quickly, didn't I? And I was
That looks
going
good.
to say
Yeah.
all of this with the first one. So if everything's lined up, you haven't missed seeing anything yet. As I was to learn, design thinking would change my whole perspective. My career started in policy research and teaching strategy in business programs, then shifted to an international consulting career in technology that took me over to 37 countries after I moved to London. I had left Palo Alto. It's now known as the birthplace of Silicon Valley. In both sets of careers and many places I visited, I frequently encountered entrepreneurial people who confided, I have an idea, but I don't know where to start. At one point, I was called to a major corporation to launch a startup. I immediately had to find an answer to the question, where to start. We had a very successful launch of a multi-million-pound business, and I decided after that year to devote my career to startup founders as a consultant, teacher, mentor, and networker for investors. LSE is a well-known institution. It was founded in 1895 by the Webbs, and they were social thinkers, and their mission was to make the world a better place. So that's a pretty big mission to have. You can see here the windy stairs at our library, the building where I teach, and that's called the new administration building. Up here is the old administration building and some of our architecture. I was called to LSE in 2006 to help design an MSc, Masters of Science level entrepreneurship course, delicately labeled in a theoretical institution, enterprise development. No one said the word entrepreneurship at LSE earlier. It was a development lab in teaching entrepreneurship, as many argued it cannot be taught. Through many years of association with founders, however, I knew they come from everywhere. And I wanted to find two things to help them: how to accelerate the startup process and how to improve success rates. The D-School magazine opened the door to the answers for both of those key points in teaching. So in 2017, at a DCOM festival at HPI in Potsdam, I was fortunate to be part of the founding of the GDTA and very much enjoy participating in watching the global design thinking development through educational institutions. So today I'm looking forward very much to hearing your questions, your experience, and ideas on the subject today. If we look at design thinking, creativity is really the heart and soul of it. And I rather like this definition. Creativity is applying your imagination to solve a problem. And design thinking can play a broad role in many kinds of problem solving, perhaps almost all, because it begins to change your perspective. It opens your mind to an open mindset, which is difficult to achieve. But I do believe that design thinking has made it very much easier. And very importantly, education can create it through training, teaching others how design thinking works. I believe in it so heartily because I believe it's essential for success in learning to solve problems, but especially pertinent for entrepreneurs. And as Uli has said, entrepreneurs have many of those characteristics that we're going to talk about for design thinking. However, I will say that most of them are preoccupied with the middle step, their idea, and they have lost some very valuable time. So when we look at the basic themes, we see that it's a human-centered innovation process. Observation is very much needed, and we could call that perspectives and multiple perspectives. Collaboration, rapid prototyping, testing with users. Now, you might know the 5 steps that are often quoted for this. And really, when you think about it, empathy, defining, ideating, prototyping, testing, those are all the themes. And yes, entrepreneurs need to do all of those, but sometimes they're very skimpy on the first one. And that's the human-centered innovation process. So the question, where to start? And I can tell you this happens to me nearly daily. When people find out that I have anything to do with entrepreneurship, they do say to me, I have an idea, but I don't know where to start. So that's what we're going to talk about, what we tell the students to do. The design thinking approach bridges the market need versus an idea. Entrepreneurs often say they have an idea but don't know where to start. So using the design thinking approach provides an immediate first step. Go out into the field, talk with people who experience the problem you're interested in solving. It's so simple, I sometimes feel reluctant to say it as an opener at the beginning of a term, but that's the essence. Without that, we don't have design thinking. And without that, you have a very good chance of missing it as an entrepreneur. 35% of failures, according to Startup Genome Research, are due to a lack of a market. Doesn't that show you something right away? Using the design thinking approach leads naturally to, first of all, definition of the problem from the customer's perspective, getting to know the customer or user's needs well, define the solutions aligned to the user needs, and of course, field test with prototypes that continually evolve throughout the time that you're working on discovery. All of that sounds like common sense, and it is, but most entrepreneurs really jump to the middle with the idea, build a prototype. Sometimes that's only shown internally to people and investors, and go out to market. So they've skipped a lot of very key parts. But I want to step back a minute and say what I think is probably was the most profound discoveries. Using design thinking, we automatically start to frame and reframe as just a matter of coming up with ideas. This is so incredibly important. I cannot tell you how many founders I've worked with who have an idea and never reframe it, even when it's out in the market. So I like to think of it as simple as framing and reframing. I don't know how familiar you all are on this, but I went into one of our landscape gardens one day at Park, a National Trust Park, and was astounded to see that they had hung empty picture frames around in the trees for us to frame and reframe the view. I thought this was a lovely way to acknowledge how important to keep thinking, what is my perspective? What's this new perspective? What does that mean? So for the course, we're looking at it from all angles, but we do start from the beginning and we go through maturity when the lemonade stand has turned into a lemonade industry. However, we need in the back of our minds to keep in mind, and this is a figure I literally checked 2 days ago again, because it has stayed the same for literally decades. The US Small Business Administration used to say that on average, about 50% of new startups fail within 5 years. They still are saying about 52%. However, the global average is far higher. And if we average it out to sort of a median, it's 50 to 60% of new startups fail within 5 years. Enterprise growth is not easy and not simple answers. However, with design thinking tools, we have the ability to enable the design of an organization that can succeed because it's very simple. We're now providing solutions to real needs. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the students and about the course. It's evolved through the years. I was called to LSE, as I said, in 2006 to design the course. That was the first year, and it was an elective course. The second year, the Department of Management, after over 100 years, LSE was going to teach management. It was very much frowned upon as too practical to talk about management, so it was not taught. 2007, the Department of Management was formed, a consolidation of several departments, and our elective went in as a core requirement for the degree, master's degree in management, organizations, and governance. And it stayed there for about the next 15 years. The way we organized it was to have students come and it was a required course, without an idea that they were planning to work on. That's unusual, because often entrepreneurial classes, they expect you to come with an idea already. But this worked well because everybody started from the same base. Everybody was starting. We also said, you form your teams. We're not going to assign people to teams. And teams were formed, 5 persons. Then in the 5-person teams, they would assign or select the roles that apply to a functional business. So a functional business has a leader, finance, HR, marketing, strategy, and those 5 roles then would be taken on, and they would assume those roles for some of their work, because LSE was not about to let us give a group grade. So we needed to separate the individual within the team, and it worked out very well. We had many different ways of working with them in those first years, including adding a whole extra term for the course. When the acting dean said to me on a crowded London bus one night, you know, you're teaching about all the different parts of management. We don't have a course on that. So why don't we add a semester to a term to your course? And that's how we became a 2-term course for a while. That was around 2010. By 2012, I was getting very intrigued with the potential to help our students with design thinking in a far more, and I would say a very solid way of using it. So in 2012, we started to introduce design thinking into the course. And what we learned at that point was that people really very much improved their projects, as we suspected, and they enjoyed it very much. We also were very fortunate in having a large number of people that we could call upon to help us give workshops, and one of them even came as a student and did a workshop for her classmates on design thinking. So we started to bring it in, but it was still not the core focus. So in 2015, we took a hard look at the course and said, we're going to redesign the enterprise development course. And what we did at that time was, I hope, the way you standardly would redesign a course, we brought in all the stakeholders. So we had students, former students, a TA that was a former student, external entrepreneurs, investors, accelerator people from Techstars and other accelerators. And at that point, we came up with some goals. And one of the goals was to expand the design thinking element, to provide more skills in design thinking. We also decided to expand the course to not just be first-time enterprises, but students were asking, well, what do I do if I take a job at McKinsey? How can I use design thinking? So we were going to say, we will expand it to entrepreneurial, as well as the people who had taken the year off to get a master's to decide what they were going to do next. So they wanted sort of a second career kind of choice to be taking. That expanded things quite a bit, and the design thinking began in earnest. We had some people come and give, for example, a workshop on designing your career. This was very much based on what Joanne Halpern talked about some time ago at one of our spotlights. And it was partly based or mostly based on some work that had been done by several people at several professors at Stanford. So that career element for those who were not planning to become entrepreneurs was a part of the program too. So we then had 3 streams. They were delivered in a fairly traditional way. Lots of things that we would have liked to have had were not possible in a large institution that had been very successful for over 100 years, didn't need changing. So we had lectures once a week, seminars once a week, and it pretty much a lecture and the seminars took up a day in the curriculum for them. In the seminars, they did real work. They did prototyping, and for this purpose of prototyping, we were missing a laboratory. So I was able to get sufficient budget, not for a whole room dedicated, but each term I would get supplies that we would put out for the work done in the seminars. And eventually we decided to give boxes of supplies also to teams. So that sort of was a fix-it that was never quite the dream of a lab that we all have and I see everywhere I go usually. The seminars were supplemented also because there were topics that were considered academic, sufficiently academic for seminar topics. And so we had evening workshops and students came to those. And again, because there were several streams, they would look at careers, or we would look at specialty topics like things of law, legal issues that entrepreneurs face. So we had workshops, we had seminars, we had lectures. Within the lectures, we had guest speakers that came from outside, again, modified because we needed a certain number of our faculty that would be doing the lectures. So that represents sort of the technical description of what we were going to do. I hope that was fairly clear, fairly short description of it, so you might later have some questions. So after the redesign, that was how we were working. Much of the format in terms of delivery started at the very beginning and did not change very much because I did not have the liberty. I one time tried saying for the seminar, just go out. And I found out, and I mean out in the field that day right then, and I found out that was illegal for me to do. So I couldn't leave them at just wandering around the streets of London during my lecture time. So we had to modify, and I will keep mentioning that from time to time. There were modifications that were made because it is a traditional institution. It's an institution highly qualified for their own decisions about what and how they're going to do things. One of the things I want to mention about how we were structuring the course was how we would bring them at the very beginning to an understanding of what was design thinking about. So we did some of the traditional exercises before we would talk about the phases. But one of the things that we spent quite a bit of time on, because it is the first step, empathy, we would talk about creating the persona. And I think that for the standpoint of using design thinking for startups, that's a very, very important one. Yes, it could be the user or the customer, but it can also be other people. It can be other stakeholders. So we got in the habit of at least several assignments working on the persona, a very powerful technique to have them putting the idea just temporarily not first thing in their mind, but rather the persona that would be important for the development of their venture. We also spent time in the beginning talking about some of those well-known design thinking tools of language and interviewing, to be saying yes and, dropping yes but, to be more action-oriented. I like very much in design thinking the need to use the term need. So you're identifying the user needs a way to do something because that's perspective and the action. And I find this a very good exercise to just do all separately too, to look at what is needed. Because if we look carefully, it's a grammatical thing too. Needs to asks for a verb. If they need something, that can be a noun. We want to get action. We want to accelerate. We want action to be a part of literally everything we're doing. So I very much emphasize the language of design thinking. And actually, I could go on about that because I find it fascinating that by just changing our words, we get a new perspective. But one of the other sets of words that we emphasize in the very beginning is not to push an idea, but rather to pull it out. Marketing people use persona, they use push-pull anymore, and probably don't know they're doing design thinking. But in fact, design thinking says that's where you start, not after in a focus group. So what we are helping them to do is identify gaps, needs, and some potential solutions, but that comes after the persona is well understood. And I use the term understood when I'm talking about empathy. It's a term that sometimes seems to me very much like a part of California where I grew up. But sometimes in some countries, it is a little more vague and perhaps a little unwanted soft amongst some business people. And I would even say some academics. They want theory, not understanding. And I mean that quite specifically. It's almost a game to be talking theoretically if you haven't talked with the users, if you haven't shown them what you're going to do. So those were the beginnings and sort of the philosophy. And I think the why I'm doing design thinking is the key thing, not so much how. I suspect that there's many ways that we could be doing this. And I always enjoy watching other people having sessions with students. But what I think is really super important is the philosophy and helping people to get an open mindset. So that becomes the philosophy of the course. And to show you a little bit more, I'm going to show you some field work assignments, quite specific. And that came after finding that if I just talked about going out into the field, they weren't bringing back much. So I one day talked to someone who was teaching design thinking at Stanford. And I said, how do you get good field work? And they just looked me in the eye and said, we assign them. And so I thought, oh, that's harder than I usually give a lot of room for learners. So that made it very specific. So now it's A to G, and you're supposed to do all of these things, and they bring back beautiful things. So you can see that the first thing that they were assigned to was to do the persona and the field research that was needed. Now, these minutes were what was done on the work within the seminar. They obviously were going to conduct the field research during the week. But my learnings from this was that they enjoyed it very much. They got into personas immediately, and they found it useful for, and every entrepreneur that I suggest it to find it a very useful technique to start with. So the first thing, as the first step in the 5 steps that often we refer to as design thinking, empathizing was in the first few weeks. Then, and there we might have them design more than one persona, as I mentioned. Then another example, further on, we're empathizing still with them, but we've gotten to the marketing side, and we've gotten to a very specific problem that entrepreneurs have. I've found consistently that they enjoy using a technique that is written up by Dolan, and Dolan is a person that has been overlooked in economics in terms of his pricing thermometer. I saw it being used in a design thinking entrepreneurial course, and I examined it more, and we use it a lot because it helps you to see more than one side. Again, gives you multiple perspectives on what your pricing decision should be. So I'm going to show you what they go out to the field with and why it's so valuable. And there's the full reference, R.J. Dolan and J.T. Gurville, 2009. This is a value-based thermometer, the first thing. And you can see that there's lots of different factors to get. It's not just what margin I want. It's not just cost of goods sold plus some margin. It has a very important set, objective value and perceived value. Now, objective value is pretty much what everyone might agree your product or service is worth. But the more you work at it, the more you notice that you can change perceptions. For example, I had a team that was working on having some measurement tools in running shoes. And they just were doing it as a bit of a gimmick of quality of the run, as well as to improve style. But then we started looking at the value, and we realized that if you run and are a serious runner, running many miles, you can injure your body and your muscles if you aren't doing it correctly. Therefore, we can go to an objective value that includes prevention of medical injury. You see, it opens up a lot of perceived views of the product. Now, I don't have time to spend teaching you the pricing thermometer, but that was, in fact, what we were doing when we said build your pricing thermometer. Looking at all facets. Cost of goods is just a baseline. That was the very bottom line, CSG down there. So when I went through the syllabus, I was looking for places we could, in an academic way, expand the knowledge of the students, but using that in a design thinking way. So I hope that that's clear why I was showing that pricing thermometer, and we can have some questions later about that. Another one, and I'll show you the exercise after I explain the terms, is to have them do network mapping for resources, because the network ties equals social capital. And one thing that we found with design thinking is that we wanted to broaden their scope. Social capital is there. It's in plentifulness. I remember a team that decided to change their topic when they found that there were lots of good solutions out in the marketplace. And so the team mapped their network ties. The teams are all very international. So on the one team, there was someone from France as well as someone from Chile. Guess what they turned to? Wine growing. Then they looked at a particular aspect of wine growing. It was vineyards and how they could grow vineyards, be sustainable, and use the vines rather than paying to have them hauled away. Social capital was the source of the idea because they had mapped that these are people in our networks that we want to use. So the social capital is also rounding out financial capital. And that is really very important too, because the financial capital in the earliest stages is not as necessary as people think. Okay, so the very last one that I'm going to show in detail is that the partners. Partners are another type of resource. They come from your networks. They are social capital. They also will need to have a value proposition of why to become your partner and as a startup. And so that's where we had them spend time on their networks and then developing a prototype of their idea to demonstrate how it fits with the partner and conduct then field research on the partners. Now, some of these have been assignments that went into the next seminar when they would report back. And again, because they initially had been, without clear direction, had been somewhat just literal, come back and tell us what happened. We asked them to keep a varied visual record. So they had essentially a notebook of the visual record of their findings. And this was very helpful for the projects that they had. So I'm going to come to the next part of this, which is a natural lead into the prototypes. And the rainmaking prize that I'll talk about in a minute is a source of inspiration for them. They had a healthy drink. This was the prototype was a healthy drink with all natural ingredients, and their proof of concept was they had developed it, showed us samples of the beverage, and at that point, the people were able to tell us all about the customer needs sourcing, marketing that they had done with the design thinking field work that they had been working on.
Linda, you asked me to give you a sign.
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes left now until the hour is over. So if you want to give some time for Q&A, it would be great.
I'm speeding up now because I'm showing examples. Thanks. You for the time alert. Okay, here's another prototype to just show the level. One was a picture and a drink. Here is something that could be and has been fabricated as a prototype. Now I'm going to just give you very briefly, and I'm going to read out what this is. This is one that is a successful project that summarizes what we have done and could achieve. So here, the writer is the founder, talking about the principles of design thinking. We were able to identify a problem. Then we used it to help create pictures. And here's a picture of the problem. in Southeast Asia, the students do not have desks in their classrooms, nor do they have desks at home for studying. And you can see they get distracted. Here's several of them that are tussling around. They don't sit in a classroom. So they talked with NGOs in particular, and they came up with an idea called EduCase, a backpack that unfolds into a smooth desk. I'm going to show you a photo of it, and then I'm going to show you what was, this article was written last year. Fast forward today, EduCase is a registered social enterprise, helped around 1,000 children in Nepal. And I'm going to show you the team. And this was made out of a cardboard folding apparatus, a little lamp. The team, as you can see, came from every country and continent in the world. And I wanted to show you that because it's what we could do with design thinking at LSE. We had the teams from everywhere, lots of ideas. The design thinking brought them to solutions that could be used anywhere in the world. We had many. Here's a picture of EduCase today. It's in a little folder. They take it out and it folds out, and it's a desk at home or at school. We had a sponsor of a professional entrepreneurs, Rainmaking, also are founders of Startup Bootcamp, a huge successful worldwide accelerator. They came and gave prizes. Here were some that I was going to talk about, but won't today. And I was going to leave with the thought that the value of design thinking is more than just for startups and entrepreneurships. It's for all areas of education. It inspires creativity, increases freedom of choice, encourages reframing, multiple perspectives. And how can we expand it? Here is an early way we were able to expand at LSE. This was HPI giving 2-day seminar for the whole Department of Management had a chance to go to it, rather than just the students in enterprise development. So building with others, sharing the ideas, that's the potential that we have in higher education curriculum overall, or down to one course enterprise development. And I celebrate that almost daily. The notion that how can we encourage this for all courses, higher education, primary school? What are the barriers? And what are practical ways to eliminate the barriers? So that's my final word. And those are questions that I hope we can have a few minutes to discuss, as well as any questions about what we did at LSE. I am long-winded. I've had a very long career. It's hard to synthesize. Okay, and so if you want to contact me for more details, I have my famous initials, LJ Hickman at lse.ac.uk. I really, truly want to hear from you. I live design thinking. My whole family has to reframe any arguments. Okay. I hand it back to you, Uli.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And applause to Linda. And I would like to all of you to switch on your video if you get a chance. Thanks a lot for your insight. Linda, if I saw it right, your last picture on your thank you slide, that was taken in Berlin at the Sony Center, was it?
Yes, I used that for the artistic detail design. I sometimes start out design thinking with lots of good design that are artistic. So it looked like it to me too. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks a lot. I didn't see any questions yet in the chat, but I'm sure there are some, and please raise your hand. There's Mats already. So just to let you know, we have now 7 minutes left in our official schedule, but Linda, you have a little bit more spare time, is that right? After the full hour. But yeah, so we can stay, but our official recording also will end after 60 minutes, so we'll stop it, and then we can continue with all of them, all of you who want to continue talking with Linda. Mats, how is your, from Open Lab in Stockholm, your question?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I agree on a lot of what you said. Sorry that I joined sort of like 20 past, so maybe this has already been answered. But according to your thermometer, there you had something called product price and then perceived value, and then on top of that you had objective value, and that's sort of a problem with us, at least, that people perceive values individually, but what do you mean with objective value? That's very, very hard to establish, at least in our context. So perception is individual, but objective is sort of a collective value, and that is, it's really a big problem finding this sort of objective value. Do you have any comment or idea on how to aggregate to this objective value?
Yes, and philosophically, I don't believe there is such a thing as subjective reality or an objective value, but for practical purposes, we can use those terms, and it would be a more agreed valuation. And it's one, for the example that I used was about the team that had the trainers, the running shoes, that the objective value couldn't be argued in terms of the cost of medical, I mean, obviously you could have small amount of medical injury, but at the highest level. And so that is a more agreed level atop. In general, we found that there was corroboration, not through the collaboration. So people could get a sense of that. But what we did see is that oftentimes oftentimes entrepreneurs have a flaw in their pricing because they only are looking at it from their own eyes and the benefits they think people will have. And yet over and over, and this is actually famously what Eric Ries says, he said, I thought we had totally different benefits, and then our customers were using our tool avatars totally differently. And so that's again where design thinking fits in. You observe what the perceived value is, and you bring it together up into the highest point of an objective value. Does that help? And if you have more questions, I think maybe we can take this as something to discuss separately, because I do like it. It's a great idea. I saw some really good use of it.
Okay, thank you for your, thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Theodora Meyer, yeah.
Yeah, hello. Thanks a lot, Mr. Weinberg, Dr. Hickman, for this great explanation. I would like to share one point, because I'm used to design thinking for a very long time, but as a scientist, I'm getting more and more to the focus of thinking. Design, I'm also a fine artist, of course. Design is and arts is a clear aspect to me, but in my research as a philosopher, I'm growing more and more into the aspect of thinking, because there's a crossover to knowledge transfer, logical questions, and all the stuff. And Dr. Hickman, I know you are affine to this subject, and I would really love to hear a little bit more about this, but I think it's not for today, maybe somehow. And of course, I would love to share this point between you and maybe a London School of Economics. But at this moment, my very interest is focused on, is this an aspect in your teaching every day, in the area of your program inside London School of Economics? Because the big point is ethics, of course. You may imagine this, no? It's ethics and ethics pragmatic. And I'm working for many years on this point. And I would love to hear much more in this aspect from you.
Well, the course itself is for enterprise development. We've migrated into it being a design for social innovation to stay with the school's mission much more in terms of social. I said the mission in the first couple of minutes, so a lot of people missed it. LSE's mission is to make the world a better place. So ethics would come into it, but it's not taught and discussed specifically at this stage. But at this stage, it would be something to be thinking about, particularly with the AI, which again, in a side note, I was practicing AI at one point in my career. So I have lots of thoughts on the ethics now issues. So I would put this into something more like a workshop. What I find in an established establishment, you don't change things readily. You just invite them to come and give their talk. And that way you get the information in, even if it's not going to be on the syllabus. So that's probably my best way of explaining how I work, and the things that aren't listed could come in other ways. Does that help you? And also, again, feel free to write and ask something. Yeah.
Thank you. And Joanne, hi. Good to see you.
Okay, so Linda, thank you so much for your presentation. One thing that really struck me was when you talked about needs versus needs to requiring a verb. And I love that. I also was at last night somebody just come up with a translation of Thomas Mann, the stories of Thomas Mann, and he was talking about, as a translator, this is a German English for those of you in the audience who are German, that he often, as a translator, turns the German nouns into English verbs, because the different languages have different ways of expressing. And I had never thought of that before, but this might be also interesting, is to talk about in terms of language and differences.
I think so very much. German is my second language, and I can see a good reason to change them into nouns. So the thing that really strikes me, Joanne, is the fact that we don't think enough about our language. And since I worked much of my corporate career with an interpreter sitting one step behind me, so I didn't see them, but that, the interpretation was being made. And I became so concerned that I spent much more time just on body language. And it got to the point where people would say, "Do you speak Czech?" Because I would be nodding along with their reply in Czech. But the point is, we know that language and body language are such plastic communication channels, and we don't give enough attention to it. And if you're going to make a product or give a product and fulfill a need, we have to be very sure we know what other people are thinking. And so I think it's the most, in fact, if I had time for another career, I would probably go more into linguistics. I'm writing a book right now, but it's slow going because I like all of the words. I can't bring myself to cross one out. And it's just, it's been a real insight from design thinking. I would not have had that if it were not design thinking and trying to get the multiple perspectives across. And that's that. In many ways, what you've heard is a summary of what I found in design thinking, but it answered a lot of insights and questions that arose from a long corporate career in 37 countries.
Thank you.
So thanks for bringing up words.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, that is a good point in time to officially end our GDTA spotlight session together with Linda Hickman from London School of Economics today here, our April session. And thanks a lot for joining. Thanks to Linda, again, big applause. And I'm really happy that you are moving design thinking forward at the London School of Economics and with the entrepreneurs who are usually very individualistic people, and you bring together 5 of them in a team and make them experience that to work together and to be an entrepreneur team together is even a better approach. So thank you very much. And now we stop. There's Steffi. Do we have a slide for our next, or can you tell us about the next GDTA spotlight in May? Yeah, we have the i3 Lab Entrepreneurship Innovation Center as a guest on May 23rd. I think the time is not decided yet because we have to figure out the time zone issues. And but remember 23rd of May. So thanks a lot. And